If the name Venom rings a bell, it's probably because you've clicked on this video and already know who Venom is. So I won't bore you with the details about this awesome character. I'll jump right into how he can appear in the MCU. But first, this intro. While Marvel movies are fun because we get to see aliens shoot magic laser beams at each other, there's actually quite a bit of business going on behind the scenes. I mean, not only are these things massive productions involving literally thousands of hands on deck, but perhaps the most epic of battles go down in the boardroom. While contract negotiations are the norm, there are a handful of deals that make or break the entire landscape of the MCU. The only thing more dangerous to the future of the Marvel world than Thanos with all the Infinity Stones is actually a well-educated lawyer with a briefcase full of documents. What do those documents even say? Does anyone even look at those things? For example, we know that Tom Holland's contract is for 3 solo films as well as 3 co-starring ensemble films. Avengers Ensemble! What's interesting about the word ensemble is you really only have to say it 3 times before it stops making sense. Spider-Man has already appeared in Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame, so there's 3 group movies. He's also had 2 solo films, Homecoming and Far From Home. That means that Tom Holland has 1 solo movie left on his contract. Want to know what happens to Spider-Man in the MCU? While looking at the character's story arc could provide some clues, you're probably better off looking at the actor's paperwork to get your answer. Sure, they could always just sign him up for more movies once the contract is finished, but that's a lot easier said than done. Unfortunately, it's not really up to Tom Holland or Marvel. It's up to Sony. You're probably saying, with that smug look on your face, but wait, where does Sony, the creator of the Walkman and Bravia TVs, factor into all of this? They don't, keep him in a cage in the basement of Sony headquarters. I mean, they own the actual intellectual property rights of the character, although I can't confirm that they don't keep him in a cage in the basement of the Sony headquarters. You see, back in the 1990s, the world was a different place. People everywhere were kicking around hacky sacks and jamming out to the latest Chumbawamba record, and Marvel Comics was far from the juggernaut that it is today. In fact, they were hurting so much that they had to start selling off assets, including the rights to one of their most prominent characters, Spider-Man. Sony bought the rights for cheap and have been reaping the benefits ever since. In the immortal words of Howie Mandel, they made a good deal. Flash forward to 2015 and all of a sudden Marvel is back on top, with a little help from this company you may have heard of called Disney. Following the success of Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and the Avengers, they've got the superhero world pretty much on lock.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Only there's one character that would really be the cherry on top, and that's Spider-Man. So Marvel and Sony sat down and hammered out a rather interesting agreement that still exists to this day. Sony gets all the box office revenue from the Spider-Man films, while Marvel, or Disney, gets to profit off all the merchandise and licensing. With only 1 film left in the Spider-Man deal though, that might change pretty soon. Moving forward, it's likely that the 2 sides part ways. The cost to re-up their contract and continue licensing the character without owning it would probably be astronomical at this point, based on Spider-Man's popularity. Disney kinda shot themselves in the foot by building up such an incredible character that they never actually owned in the first place. So maybe they just buy it now? I mean, if this were the stock market, that wouldn't be a wise decision to buy while the value is at an all-time high, but what other options do they really have? After all, if there's anything Disney loves more than creating timeless classics, it's buying things. What would a deal of that magnitude even look like? I mean, for starters, it would be expensive. Plus, Sony has all the leverage. If they don't like the offer, they can just keep everything and make their own Spider-Man movies.
Can't repeat the past.
Sony has been open about wanting to create their own little comic book universe, and Disney wouldn't just buy the one character either. They would need to acquire the whole Spider-Verse. It's not like Disney would acquire Spider-Man but not MJ or Ned, unless Sony is interested in that rumored standalone Aunt May flick that everyone's getting excited about. That would be a bad movie. So that would mean that they'd also acquire you-know-who. No, not J. Jonah Jameson. I'm talking about Venom. There are so many intricacies to consider, like, does Marvel have to buy all the characters and their costumes? Can they simply purchase Spider-Man without having to acquire the entire cast of characters that accompany him? Like, is there a scenario where Tom Hardy and Venom stay with Sony, but Peter Parker joins Disney full-time? We didn't even mention the Spider-Man video games, which grossed about as much as any of the Spider-Man movies. I've got a headache just thinking about that. I also banged my head pretty hard on the way in here. Okay, so what does this mean for everyone's favorite web-slinger moving forward? Well, it would be pretty foolish if they spent all this time and energy building up the character only to remove him from the MCU after the next movie. Then again, no deals have been struck as of yet. The way we see it, there are really only two ways in which this can go. Either Disney acquires Spider-Man, along with Venom and the rest of the Spider cast, or Sony hangs on to the web-slinger and adds him to their own universe. Either way, Spider-Man and Venom are coming face-to-face very soon. Sony hasn't been shy about their interest in building their own comic book universe. Although 2018's Venom was met with mixed reviews, the numbers don't lie, and it was undeniably a box office success. So it's safe to assume that another Venom installment is on the way. And that's just the beginning. They're starting with Venom the way that Marvel started with Iron Man back in 2008, but there's plenty more to come. Sony has already announced that next year they'll be releasing a standalone Morbius film starring Jared Leto. For those unfamiliar, Morbius is a scientist who turns himself into a vampire. Sounds like the perfect opportunity for Jared Leto to make an overhyped and underwhelming comic book movie. He'll also be portraying a DC character and a Marvel character because if anyone deserves that sort of accolade, it's Jared Leto. Sony also has plans to move forward on movies for Black Cat and Silver Sable, Kraven the Hunter, and Jackpot. Comment in the section below if you just completed obscure superhero bingo. With a star-studded foundation like that in the works, it wouldn't be a bad call for Sony to figuratively take their ball and leave. By that I mean they could hang on to Spider-Man and just make their own movies. Not only would it add credibility to their universe, but it would be a massive blow to Disney and Marvel. On the other hand, if Disney were to shell out that extra coin and just acquire it all, it wouldn't be too difficult to make the transition on screen. Spider-Man is already a part of the story, and now that multiverses are in play, pretty much anything is possible. And there's a slew of different ways that they could introduce a character like Venom. Rumor has it that Marvel's next big story arc following the Infinity War is going to be the Secret Invasion. In it, the Skrull invade Earth and infiltrate human personas. An alien arriving on Earth and taking over humans? That sounds oddly familiar. Oh right, cause Venom did it first. There's also the fact that the MCU is all about space exploration these days. Intergalactic themes have all but become the norm, so it's possible that someone stumbles upon Venom's home planet. Perhaps the Guardians of the Galaxy on their next space expedition make the discovery. They could also just do without any sort of elaborate tie-in or explanation and just introduce Venom as a new character. We often forget that things don't have to be so complicated. Weird. So what does Venom look like in the MCU? We know they can introduce the character in a number of ways, but the real important question is when. Spider-Man and Venom are destined to meet up at some point. Their history runs too deep and their relationship with one another is just too strong to keep them apart for much longer. Whoa, I made that sound really romantic. But really, these two go way back. The symbiote was originally introduced as a living alien costume in The Amazing Spider-Man number 252, back in May of 1984. The first full-fledged appearance of the character Venom was in The Amazing Spider-Man number 300 in May of 1988. Ever since then, Spider-Man and Venom have either been battling one another or working side by side. Whether it's Tom Holland and Tom Hardy playing the roles is still to be determined. After all, there's no guarantee that either production studio would hire the same actor that played the role for another company. Then again, it would probably come as a disappointment if either of these roles were recast by, different Toms, like Venom is Tom Waits and Spider-Man's Tom Hanks. Actually, that sounds great. It's been a long time coming, and having these two square off on the big screen is something that fans have been eagerly anticipating for years. It's never happened before, unless you count the time that it happened in Spider-Man 3, which we don't. They've encountered one another countless times in the comics, but we choose to believe that they've never met up in a film. So whether it's in Far From Home...
It's false. No way. Not this time. We created it.
Or a release in the near future, we're excited about Spider-Man and Venom finally meeting in a movie for the very first time and not the second. What do you think the future has in store for the Venom character? Will he finally make his way over to the MCU, or will Sony decide to develop their own Spider-Man storyline? Sound off in the comments down below and let us know how you see this playing out. Before you go, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. It's so fun to do, you'll love it. Also, subscribe to Behind the Screen to stay up to date on all our latest releases. Until next time, bye!